I'm I'm deeply heartened by the interest in the risk and compliance of late, recognizing the role of legal and compliance in making fintechs attractive and investable. Given the highly innovative in fintech, it is hard for us to catch up with technology. Compliant officers need allies and who can be better than the founders and the product development team. Done right, compliance is a business enabler. In one of our recent episodes, Mark's recitation of Rudyard Kipling's If struck a chord. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for the doubting too. The journey towards becoming an effective money laundering reporting officers, or MLRO in short, is indeed a test of character, requiring the ability to maintain composure in the face of mounting pressures. So, however, the MLRO's role goes beyond personal attributes. It encompasses a complex interplay between the MLRO and the company's management. It feels daunting, yet exciting, for there are lots of opportunities to make a difference to people's lives. I would like to tap on the OCC's views on how we can be more effective as MLROs. And let's start with Nigel today, who is a financial crime risk and compliance strategist. Over to you, Nigel.
Yes, Julie, the difference between what I do and what you three do is that you are either incumbent MLROs or you've been MLROs for a long time. And I look at it from outside the business. As a strategist, I'm not part of the system. I'm outside the system and looking to see what's going wrong, what could be made better, and how to make it more effective. And ideally, how to make it cheaper. And what I see, the problems that I see MLROs face is that the staff don't like them because they think they're preventing them doing business. The management don't like them because the staff don't like them, and because they don't understand what they do, and because they see the MLRO's department as a cost department without seeing any direct benefits, so they won't invest in it properly. And lastly, the regulator that sees the MLRO as their internal eyes and ears, and then when something goes wrong, blames the MLRO, which is a stupid position to be in, because you've got, say, 45,000 people working in a large bank. And when one of those people, and we know there's going to be 0.01% of those people are going to commit financial crime. We know that, statistics. If you've got 45,000 people and 0.01% of those people is going to do it, there are 45 people in that organization who are going to commit financial crime. It is wrong that the MLRO should be held liable for their failure. He should be held liable for his own failures. He should be held liable where the systems don't work, but he should not be held liable where people deliberately break the systems. And currently, in many countries, he is.
I think there is something here that you have mentioned about breaking the system. The challenge that we face in the current environment is that MLROs do not have the resource. There is a tendency of the priority of the resources being channeled towards technology for revenue generating areas rather than to look into the controls. So what I'm concerned about is also about the training and getting the right people and the right tools in place. Maybe on the training side, Mark, you could share some insights.
Well, I was sitting there thinking about what Nigel was saying. And just to clarify, there are now times I would not touch an MLRO if you paid me in diamonds or anything like that, because you have to be at the center of what is going on in terms of senior management information flow and establishing a relationship that works both ways. That enormous caveat aside, if you look at Danske Bank and the enormous cluster duck there, you come down to the fact that bits of the system were deliberately designed not to report into what was going on at center. I say deliberately, others might say accidentally. The decent people still try to get it to management's attention And management went, let's have this conversation outside the room, shall we? Until it all blew up a few months later. So it brings us back to whistleblowers, ethics, what you're doing, and then what management are actually doing. In terms of training, it is under current regulatory expectations, and I await with breath what Des has got to say on this. My understanding that it's easier to train for computer score than it is for efficacy. Because money launderers, whatever you think of them, are not stupid people. The mules are the people who are selling their identity for $10 a day. These things that systems can pick up reasonably straightforwardly if you know what you're doing. But the ones who know how to penetrate a system, the ones who know how to suborn what's going on, these are the people, for example, who put those poor Vietnamese in the back of a lorry in Tilbury to suffocate. And this is what I will come back to. This is why I get emotional about the whole subject. When you are training people these days, a lot of them go, it's not worth it. We don't see anything. And the issue has got to be linking in the real harm that professional money launderers do to people's day-to-day work. And to do that, you've got to know the systems. You've got to have a rough idea of the personalities and humanity, and you've got to have the experience to say to senior management, your training's wrong. But that's just me. Des, am I being hysterical?
No. When we're talking about the relationship between a company's management team, which could be the CEO, the board, or the senior management team, and the MLRO, the definition of the relationship essentially is it's interpersonal and it can be emotional. Now, the MLROs may well be the ones that get in trouble because of the failings of a company or because they fail to heed warnings. It's quite interesting that only a couple of hours ago, Goldman Sachs have been told off by the Fed for their fintech division. Their fintech unit had used the banking infrastructure is used to fintech clients, including payments like Startup and Wise. But the employees within the Goldman Sachs fintech unit were warning everybody internally over the tendency to minimize risks with their high-risk clients. So this relationship is about communication, if you want. Now for me, there's two sides. The MLRO, in my opinion, needs to be someone who, like you and I, Mark, and both Julia and Nigel, we can sometimes be quite adversarial, and the relationships can sometimes be stressful. That's part of being a relationship. We also, as MLROs, have to accept that you're not going to be the most popular person in the firm all the time. If you want to go for a popularity contest, you're in the wrong job. But each person that has that role within the company, ignoring the board, the senior management, CEO, you've got to have, in my opinion, confidence and decisiveness to confront the decisions. And that's what helps an MLRO in the relationship. However, because the relationship is two ways, there are downsides to that. And across many businesses that I've worked with over the years, I can give you some examples of where it was evidence that the relationship was obviously breaking down, and then it's going to be up to that MLRO as to whether they carry on or are they seeing the danger signals in the relationship. I had one CEO who constantly told me that he did not think anything that I brought up was a problem. It's not a breach. or it was worthwhile reporting. And that was his opinion to me, trying to do my job. Warning.
If I can come back to you there for a day, because that at that point is where you have to trust your judgment, and that is your role. And then this is where a lot of MLROs, particularly inexperienced ones, can get browbeaten out of doing their job, which is why I think there is a reason for compulsion on MLROs from time to time. My worry is regulators use it as a stick to ever change their mind as what they think good practice is. Sorry for interrupting.
No, certainly. The regulators don't quite, I think, don't understand the relationship, because it can be a one-sided, even toxic relationship in businesses, depending on the size. Now, you know, some CEOs, senior managements, think of compliance in a dismissive way. And it can be dependent upon the size of the company, because I've worked with fintechs, less than 50 people, to larger financial institutions with more than 3,500 people, multi-regional. But the same things kind of come up. Another warning sign, downside flag, warning sign, whatever you want to call it, is new products are launched or strategy meetings are held. IML and risk considerations are not considered as a factor in the decisions made. That's got to be a warning sign. So this one-sided relationship, you know, going to be dependent upon the type of person that MLRO is. Not being invited to monthly senior management meetings because they've got somebody doing the role who doesn't realise how large an issue those kind of problems are going to be. So the upside is you need to be, in my opinion, adversarial at times and have the confidence in your getting your point over. It doesn't always make you popular, but it's very interesting. Perfect example, last example before we move on. I had a CEO who refused to apologise to me or even admit that they were wrong after the business received a warning from the regulator for breaking the rules on reporting deadlines. And that was despite me telling the CEO and the board that they can't just return a nil report. And I warned them what would happen, that it's obvious we can't do a nil return. They did a nil return. You would get, you've lifted your head and shoulders above the parapet for the regulator to shoot at you. And not one of the senior management, or definitely the CEO who told me it wasn't relevant, turned to me and said, "You're right." I didn't want them to tell me I was right. I wanted them to get it right in the first place. But that was it took me probably another year, 18 months to get out of that company, because obviously things get worse. So there are downsides, but the upsides are the type of person you are. I'll pass that back to you, Jude.
I think that I've looked at this, exactly these same issues, literally exactly the same issues since the mid-1990s. It's not merely a conflict. It is a determination by some people within senior management to actively deny what they are being told by the people who really know what they're doing. And this is why you almost never see a compliance officer on a main board, because they don't want to have a vote. That's the bottom line. If we keep people at one stage below board level, then we can keep them quiet. I think that's an outrageous situation, but it is exactly what we see. Des, you were about to say something.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I agree with you. I wish I didn't, but again, personal experience, and I've had good experiences and bad experiences, but I've actually had a CEO pull me to one side and say that they would not participate in compliance discussions because they wanted deniability.
I have heard of the global, as in the head in the USA, of an American bank telling an officer in London to tear up the report he'd made saying why the London office was not compliant with UK regulations. Not actually tear it up, it was delete it off your computer. I'm doing that from mine, and make sure there are no copies of it. We don't want it to be disclosable.
I think I have a different take on this, given that I came in, actually, I'm quite fresh as an MLRO, is that typically the MLROs will be the ones to have their heads sticking out of the parapet, being shot at by the regulators. But as we would know it, most of the time, especially in fintechs or in a startup, is where you generally have more junior compliance officers or with less years of experience sitting as the MLRO. And I think this is where there is a challenge of even when the MLRO thinks that something is wrong, he or she may not feel confident to say it out because they have actually not had sufficient training or experience or even the right tools to do so. So from that perspective, maybe I would like to also draw some insights from the OCC on how we could bring up the standard and the knowledge of our junior professionals so that they are to equip them to be able to stick out their necks and be confident to say no.
A couple of things spring to mind, if I may leap in here with my large mouth and open brain on this one. Effectively, learn from history. Go through, have a look at some of the really big screw-ups. Okay, Danske Bank is quite recent. HSBC, Standard Chartered, International Payments, RIGS, BCCI. And you'll get a feeling for the sort of key areas which will indicate that you've got a problem flocking your way, in my view. Secondly, remember the old regulatory dictum: if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So coming back to Nigel's point and to Jess's point, you keep copies of what you write. Now that's very controversial, but that saves your professional skin. Okay, because we have always assumed in the whole of this conversation that we're dealing with rational boards and rational senior managers. For those of us who've lived through the political fights that go on when an organization is changing strategy or something is failing, there's a temptation to bring an MLRO in on your side, whichever side that might be. So again, it comes back to the point that Des was making about independence and the ability to stand your ground. So I hope that the youngsters coming into this, and we do need young blood, people who are native technology units, who have a much better idea of what's going on than some old buffer like me. We need that new blood, and we need to listen and get those messages out there. Okay. But if you're going to be successful in this, don't go into it thinking it's a one way. You credential yourself that you can just go through role to role until you've been tested in fire. We don't know how we react. I certainly didn't, but I'm a hell of a better MLRO on the other side of it than I was going in. Sorry, but Julia, too depressing?
No, actually, when it comes to learning from the past, it's exactly why I have started engaging with the OCC, and because there's so much that we can learn from you and your peers, actually. And that's what do you say?
We definitely, it's a word of advice to the people coming into the role. Nigel will probably back me up that since the introduction of the anti-money laundering regulations, the large financial institutions had an initial or element of resistance to having financial services just becoming an extension of law enforcement. And the regulations seem to be pushing that still today. although there are many MLROs that I do know who are ex-police. So they're now in their 30s. They've done maybe 10 years in the police and come out and running the MLRO positions. And they have a purpose in their roles. So maybe we should be talking about having the purpose in the role. Their purpose is to namely get the baddies. But it goes against the whole what financial institutions need. On the other side, a lot of the MLROs that I see coming in that have got 0 to 5 years experience, or maybe just a little bit more, who believe that their role is driven by factors such as satisfying regulators and avoiding fines, which meets the businesses side of the equation. It's a delicate balance. I'll leave it at that.
We started with the strategies and we shall end with the strategies. What are your thoughts about strategy, Nigel?
We've talked about the relationship between the MLRO and the management from the point of view where they're not getting the support that they require and they're often being obstructed. But there are a lot of other issues that we need to think about as well. And there are things like, does the MLRO have the necessary authority within the decision-making process when it comes to specifying technology? Does he have the necessary authority when it comes to specifying which consultants are engaged? I mean, for example, management in a bank may well say, but we go to X consultancy for everything, and so that's who you will use for this, no matter whether they're utterly rubbish at it or not. The third thing is the who defines the training. Now, I've been arguing about this for the best part of 30 years. Training should not be defined by HR. It should be defined by the money laundering reporting officer, because he knows what his people needs. And HR mostly will say, well, why don't we send somebody to a seminar? They can pick up the notes, bring them back, and then we can claim we've had train the trainer, and we can use those notes for the trainer to go for somebody in our HR department to go round and deliver a half-hour or 1 hour lecture based upon those 2 days, which even the presenter will have said is inadequate for fully understanding the job. So these are the things. He doesn't have the necessary budgetary authority. He doesn't have the necessary power to say yes or no over what technology he will get in many cases. He may have some input, but often not enough. And he almost certainly doesn't get authority over who he gets in to help him get advice and assistance in designing and implementing and operating the policies and procedures within the institution. Without those, his personal risks are greatly elevated.
On the point about training, Nigel, I just have one experience to add. There was a bank, I shall not name. They have invited a group of trainers to come in to do a demo. And from each of the trainers, they collected the materials and they developed their own. And I'm sure that this is not limited to just one bank or one organization. I think a lot of organizations are doing that without realizing that the people who have actually developed these materials are the right people to deliver, because they are the experts and they are the subject matter experts in those areas.
I went to 3 banks in Malaysia some years ago, not in relation to training, but in relation to designing their systems, discovered that they were getting a number of consultants in from various organizations, and they took our proposals, merged them, and decided what they wanted out of them, and none of us got a job. I will no longer go to any form of beauty parade. Des?
Some experience on that. I've actually seen consultants using slides that I've done on private presentations when consultants came in to do an audit. They took away what I did and actually tried to use it as their own. So, you know, there are some dark arts going on. I could say several years ago, and probably 15 years ago, 12 years ago. I was studying for an exam at the time that I had to pay for myself. And I was told by the senior management of that company at the time that I could do it as long as it did not interfere with my work, even though it was relevant to the business. And on another occasion, when attending one of the 3 compulsory seminars before I could take the exam, I received a phone call from the same CEO demanding I return to the office to sort out a problem they had. It kind of shows you, you know, sorry, I'm doing something that's, I want to get the qualifications. It was far better qualification than some of those out there, but that was without help from the company or the senior management. And this is something I know that we've talked about before, Julia, with training, the quality of the training, and how do MLROs and does the compliance department get a budget? We've had those discussions, haven't we?
Yes, indeed. And I think this is really a lot of food for thought on how we can have better equip our compliance team in order to face the new world of innovation. I think, you know, copying something and try to develop our own is not going to work. That's for sure. And it's definitely not a piecemeal that is going to help to drive a more robust compliance culture as well as the compliance team. I think with that, let's wrap this up until the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.